there used to be, especially for point guards in the NBA, a huge learning curve. But now we see all these guys that handle the ball. Trae Young, Luka Doncic, John Morant, this kid, Donovan Mitchell, a couple years ago, Ben Simmons, I mean, like, these are all within the last 5-6 years. And to be this good immediately is just not something that was commonplace a decade ago. I would say two things that I have noticed significantly, and I've talked to you about this a lot over the last couple of years. The level of maturity of the kids that come in the league now is it's just different. It's different than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. These kids are conditioned to celebrity now in a way that they were never conditioned to it before. If they had a crappy high school game, they heard about it. Right? Like they were forced to grow. It's almost like, when you become famous, a lot of these guys, like, they didn't start getting criticism, or they didn't start, everybody loved them until they were, in the NBA, and it's the first time that they're really going through hard times, or they felt like they're on their own, or they felt like they're kind of off alone. I would say the guidance of these kids is so much better. I've talked about how many kids are coming from just great families over and over again. I see it. And the other thing is the guidance that they get on the business side too. There are so many people steering these guys in the right direction to make the most out of and sometimes that can be dangerous because they're treated almost as an asset by the time they're 15 years old. But I will say the good of that is
like a brand
this
type of thing,
level
right?
of maturity.
Get your Instagram page already, your YouTube highlights. It's about generating,
LaMelo's been famous for 6 years. He's been under the gun. People have been paying attention to what he is doing for the last 6 years of his life. Yeah. So, I mean, in fact, I would say he's probably getting less attention being in Charlotte than he has gotten even when he was in like he didn't in overseas as much, but like when he's at Chino Hills or something.
Yeah. I mean, while Lonzo was entering the league, when Lonzo was at UCLA as a top pick, LaMelo was,
people
really
were aware
at that time. Yeah.
Especially when he scored the 100 points, which was ridiculous and all the stuff like that. So I would say maturity is one thing. And I think you're dead on about the way the game is played. Yeah. There are not you can't grab and clutch these guys, and you can't overwhelm them physically like you used to. It doesn't matter if you are the huge, barrel-chested defender that like a guy just can't get past. If he can't grab you and he can't use his arms, and even with that freedom of motion, he can't even like really stay connected to you like he did. And I'm talking, 6-7 years ago. I mean, I just did during this quarantine. I did all of these like old, great playoff games in Grizzlies history. And one of the ones we did, me and Tony Allen, we sat down and we did the Warrior series. Bro, you could never defend the Warriors like what Tony did in that series. Like you'd foul out in the first quarter. And that's just what? 7 years ago? 6-7 years ago? So I do think that you're right. It's the fact that they have tried to make offense better, but I also think these kids, you put them in front of a camera, they've been in front of a camera since the time they were 10. Mm-hmm. Like it's nothing to them.
With their with phones, people growing up with phones, growing up with the internet. And I feel that too in my own way, growing up as a child of the internet since I was 11, 12 years old. I was talking to people around the world. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about how I remember years ago, and this is so random, there used to be a Stevie Ray Vaughan guitar lesson channel on YouTube. and the guy on there talked about how when he was growing up, he used to think like he was the next Stevie Ray, how he was so good at playing guitar in like the small club in his town that he thought he was the next big thing. But then when the internet came out, he realized, oh my God, there's great guitarists in every city, every town, every state across the country. And he's like, I'm, just one of many that are super talented at playing this instrument. And with basketball players, I wonder how much of it is with this generation is an awareness of how hard you need to work in order to move up those rankings, in order to make it into college basketball, in order to make it in the NBA, an awareness and a desire to then therefore look at the things that you need to get better at on YouTube, watching film with coaches, watching League Pass at night, what you're going to work on with your trainer. I just wonder if it's all of these things adding up together, like you said, better, guidance from parents or mentors, in addition to the fact that what the competition is more than ever before, because we're all interconnected because of the internet. You have all the information out there.
Not only that, they play against each other like they didn't before.
It's true.
Even when they're young. I never, ever knew a kid. I knew a kid who was the best baseball player at my school growing up, and he made one of those junior USA teams and got to travel over to Japan and play in it. Yeah. That was the only time I ever heard about any kid traveling to play anything. I'm not kidding. Yeah. It just wasn't. That wasn't what happened. It wasn't relevant. There are 2 kids on my son's team that regularly travel to tournaments. All the time. Florida, Dallas, wherever. They're going all around the country. Kevin, they're in 5th grade. They're in 5th grade. Yeah. They go all around the country playing against other AAU teams. It's crazy.
Yep.
It's crazy. And
they're going to experience traveling and having to prep on the road, in a hotel room and all that.
But you didn't know how good some kid from another city was. Yeah. You didn't know how your city stacked up. I mean, Steven Jackson held a tournament in this town, an Iverson tournament, a couple of weeks ago. There were teams from all over the country and college coaches from all over the country. They're in the gym just to watch it. I mean, and so you knew, is the best team from St. Louis as good as this team? Is this? I mean, it's a different world. You know what I mean? You think about these stories that we grew up with. Think about the Tom Brady story that we're just going through right now. Think about the Jordan story about being cut by JV. My son right now has been inspired by a video that he saw last week. It's been 30 degrees and he's been out shooting every day because he watched a video where Kobe Bryant said he played his 8th grade summer and he did not score 1 point. Not one. And the interviewer's like, what are you talking about? He was like, 'cause I sucked. And he's like, but my father told me the most important thing you could tell a kid is that I love you whether you score 0 or whether you score 60. I love you either way, and I'll support you either way. And he goes, and that made me want to score 60. And so I went and worked, right? But I mean, you think about that, think 8th grade?
And then someday you might score 81, right?
Right. But I mean, you hear these stories and it's of Kobe and of Jordan and of Brady and of all these guys. That's just not kids now.
Yeah.
Kids now, there are going to be some that get good in 8th grade. But I mean, the majority of these kids, they start playing when they're old enough to play and they start traveling if they're really good. It's crazy.
It is. And by the way, just one other thought on this. You just mentioning Kobe brings to mind the fact that I feel like when it comes to some of the heights the great athletes today are reaching, Tom Brady at 43, LeBron at 36, Kobe, producing late into his 30s. I mean, you have all these great athletes, Serena Williams and Roger Federer at 39. I feel like regardless of the sport that you play, there are a lot of great examples that are influencing the youth.
Absolutely.
Into showing the way and what you need to do in order to maximize your performance and, reach your potential. And I wonder how much of it is that, again, tying into it's not like there weren't great examples in any other decade. It's just with information today and how accessible it is to see a clip of Kobe Bryant talking on YouTube and get that lesson, that wisdom. Right. That is something that may have been inaccessible in the past to kids because of now the information that's out there with YouTube and Twitter and everything else. There's a lot of bad with the internet, but I feel like there's a lot of good that can be had, especially for kids.
I do think this bears noting. one of the things about being so good so quickly is I think it's instructive when we look at Luka, who was able to come in the league and immediately be as fantastic as he was, and LaMelo too, because we say this in conjunction. That G League is starting this week, and there's a lot of kids on that Ignite team that decided not to go to college, but rather take their talents to the G League and play against grown men.
Take their talents to Disney World.
Well, we said that LaMelo was going to be incredibly significant, that maybe it doesn't mean that they go over and they play in Australia or New Zealand or wherever else. We really haven't seen RJ Hampton yet, and that's just because
Saturday was pretty good. He's pretty good.
But I mean, we haven't got one game.
It's
not a big sample yet for RJ. But with LaMelo, he went and he took this odd route, and he went to Lithuania, and he went and played in Australia. And so we needed, if there were going to be more guys that decide, I don't need college basketball necessarily in order to get where I want to get, and maybe the best prep for me is to play against, grown men.
Yeah.
The LaMelo thing is very helpful towards that. Now, we're going to see with Jalen Green and those other kids that are playing for this Ignite team with the G League, but at least so far, I mean, I think it's hard to argue that LaMelo wasn't maybe a little more prepared for what he was getting into by going and struggling in some cases how he did last year.
Absolutely, 100%. I think playing up, a level, whether you're 6 years old and facing 7 and 8-year-old kids, or whether you're 17, 18 facing some 27-year-old, 30-year-old people, for LaMelo Ball, I would imagine that was valuable in ways that we really can't measure, especially in that league. The NBL, I mean, it is not the same level as like the Euro League. It's not the same level as the Spanish League. But it is a league full of grown men who are playing hard, and who a lot of the time, are like, for some of them, those contracts come after, a contract in the Euro League. This is like a league for them to fight to get back. Just like for the G League, it's a league to get into the NBA. The NBL is full of players that are trying to prove themselves, and they're doing everything possible to do that. And, I'm sure that level of competition for LaMelo, even though it's a small sample, I'm sure that's very, very helpful. That's a very talented league.
Well, and you just wonder, and we'll see what happens with RJ Hampton, too, as his story plays out. But you wonder about college basketball and what kind of effect that this is going to have, because we're not far away from kids being able to go straight to the NBA. And so there will be a group of those that choose that path every year. And then the other ones that are really good, are they more apt to do the G League route? And again, we'll find out what happens with Jalen Green and all those, right? Do they help their stock by playing there? Do they hurt their stock by playing there? But I mean, they're going. Go look at those G League rosters. I mean, there's a lot of guys with NBA experience or that are going to have NBA experience, on that team. I think they said last night when I was at the game that the Raptors have I think it was 10 guys or something like that have played in the G League.
Yeah.
Not the least of which are Siakam and Van Vliet. They're two best players right now, right? But they're playing against real players, that Ignite team is. And so we're going to find out. But LaMelo, the speed of the game, the physicality of the game, he doesn't look overwhelmed at all.
Not one bit.